All right, guys. So episode number 6 got deleted accidentally by me because I'm a moron. So if you're going in order, just make sure that you're looking at the videos by their episode numbers. So I mean, even though this may look like episode number 10 in the order, this is episode number 6. So this is more about alcoholism, page 30, and step 1 starts on page 30. We've done that at the very beginning, but we're going to go through this entire chapter right now, and then hit home any points that you may have been confused about step 1, because step 1, like I said, it's the most important step. If you don't believe you're 100% alcoholic, you're going to keep going in and out. So it's very important to understand this page. Like I said, this is what it looks like in my big book. It's probably the most worn out page in my book. And I always tell people this. I was a believer in Christ my whole life. You don't have to be an agnostic or an atheist to come to Alcoholics Anonymous. There's plenty of believers that come into AA and they don't know what untreated alcoholism is. They don't know what alcoholism is. I believed my entire life. I believed, Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life. I could not stop drinking. So once alcoholism was shown to me what exactly it is, it put a light, in the path that was complete darkness. I couldn't stop drinking. I believed, and no matter how many consequences and how many, bad things happened to me, self-knowledge was not enough. No matter what I went through, that was not enough to keep me from drinking. We already talked about Dr. Silkworth and the doctor's opinion that I have that mind that's not in reality. So let's hit it again, and we're going to go through this chapter more about alcoholism. I call it one of the most important chapters in this big book. So page 30, more about alcoholism. The whole page you can just highlight at will, and we'll go over some definitions that maybe we didn't go through in the doctors when we went through the doctor's opinion in episode 1, episode 2 videos. So most of us have been unwilling to admit we were real alcoholics. We know at this point what a real alcoholic is. No person likes to think he is bodily and mentally different from his fellows. Therefore, it is not surprising that our drinking careers have been characterized by countless vain attempts, vain is unsuccessful, to prove that we could drink like other people. The idea, circle that simple word, idea. Idea means imagined in the mind. Imagined in the mind. And all these simple, basic words that, we think we understand on this page, they connect to form the mind that I'm up against. That mind that Silkworth describes that is not in reality, that cannot differentiate the true from the false. So idea, imagined in the mind, that somehow, someday he will control and enjoy his drinking, is the great obsession of every abnormal drinker. Very important word, obsession. And I would write the definition right there, if you don't already have it, right below, more about alcoholism. And obsession is a disturbing concern with an idea, we just read that word, or feeling that cannot be put out of mind even when it seems to be unreasonable. A disturbing concern with an idea or feeling that cannot be put out of mind even when it seems to be unreasonable. And like I said, a lot of people, they learn this term from rehab, triggers, and it's not a term in the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous. A lot of people use the word craving. I'm waking up and I want to drink, so I have this craving to drink. We studied in the doctor's opinion what the craving is. The phenomenon of craving is the physical allergy. I don't have a craving of alcohol until I put it into my system. So that is the allergy, the physical part. The mental part is the word I just read, the obsession. If I'm thinking about drinking, no matter how bad and how many horrible things it's done to me, if I'm thinking about drinking, that is the obsession. And I can't get that obsession out of my mind. That's the mental part of this disease. So obsession is mental. Craving is physical. So the great obsession of every abnormal drinker, the persistence of this illusion is astonishing. Persistence keeps on going, doesn't stop. Illusion. Illusion is different than delusion, and illusion is a mistaken idea or hallucination. You see how these words, ideas, this imagining in the mind is connecting. Many pursue it into the gates of insanity or death. That is a promise. That's what happens. If you are an alcoholic, a real alcoholic, without a solution, that's the final result. Insanity and death, usually both. We learned that we had to fully concede to our innermost selves that we were alcoholics. And I think I told you from the very get-go, right, step one, right there. Step one, right there, what I just said. That's where step one starts. How do I know it's the first step? It doesn't say my life is unmanageable and I'm powerless over alcohol. It doesn't say that, does it? What does the next sentence say? This is the first step in recovery. What is? I learned I had to fully concede to my innermost self that I'm an alcoholic. I have to concede. I have to surrender. I have to know that I am a real alcoholic. And the only person that can do that is you. When you go into an AA meeting, the only person that you 100% know is a real alcoholic is you. Everybody else has their own experience, and you can learn and grow and get wisdom from their experiences, whether good or bad. But you have to know that you are the real alcoholic that was well described before page 30. The delusion that we are like other people or presently maybe has to be smashed. And I said, from the get-go, that word delusion is one of the most important words in the book. It describes the mind of an untreated alcoholic. Delusion, definition, if you don't have it, persistent, false, psychotic belief. Persistent, it doesn't stop. Just because I stop drinking or using does not mean that delusion is going away. In fact, we learned that it's going to increase in speed and persistence. That delusion gets bigger and bigger of that mind, not in reality. It doesn't stop, and that's why I go back to drinking. No matter how many consequences I've been through, near death, whatever, jails, that delusion is there. And, persistent, false, psychotic belief should be right next to that word delusion. Psychotic, you can look up the word psychosis, and you will read the definition of psychosis, and it goes back exactly to what Dr. Silkworth said from the very beginning. We have a mind that is not in reality. We have a mind that cannot differentiate the true from the false, and that does not go away when we stop drinking. In fact, it increases, and that's why we always go back to drinking. You have to understand the mind that you are up against, and delusion is the focal point. It's the head of that untreated alcoholic mind. Persistent, false, psychotic belief that I can drink like other people. You ever get that? I was in the ICU with liver failure. I knew absolutely, without a doubt, I was 100% alcoholic. I shouldn't have left that hospital by a miracle from God. I left that hospital, started to think about drinking again, and I drank again. That delusion is there, that I can drink like other people. No matter how many horrible things you went through, that delusion is there, and that mind is telling you, let me see if I can do it this way or this time. Even when you've exhausted every excuse, that delusion is there talking to you. Don't worry, there's a solution. But that delusion has to be smashed. We alcoholics are men and women who have lost the ability to control our drinking. You have to know that. We know that no real alcoholic ever, italicized words, ever recovers control. All of us felt at times we were regaining control. Remember, we start feeling better after a while. But such intervals, usually brief, were inevitably followed by still less control, which led in time to pitiful and incomprehensible demoralization. There are some words to look up: pitiful, regretful, incomprehensible, impossible to understand. Demoralization, to corrupt in morals, to weaken in spirit. Imagine a bender you went out on, whether it was days or weeks, and you wake up the next morning, maybe from a blackout, or you have no idea where you are or what you're doing. You wake up, you're in that incomprehensible demoralization. Your morals are weak. Your spirit is weak. You can't understand what happened. So what's the only solution for that? More alcohol, more drugs. Or willingness, honesty, and an open mind, to know that there is a solution. We are convinced to a man that alcoholics of our type are in the grip of a progressive illness. Again, it's progressive. It doesn't stop. Alcoholism is an illness, as we've studied. Just because I stop drinking does not mean that illness is going to go away. I have a mental disorder. I have that insane mind. Insanity. What's the definition of insanity? Exhibiting a serious, debilitating mental disorder. I may not want to look that I have a mental disorder, but I do. That's a part of alcoholism. We are then it says over any considerable period, we get worse, never better. So like I just said, and that is a promise. Highlight that. That is a promise. If I'm a real alcoholic and I just don't drink, my illness is going to get worse. And it's going to come out in forms of depression, anxiety, horrible resentment. All these things pile up on us until we have no choice but to go back to drinking again. We are like men who have lost their legs. They never grow new ones. Neither does there appear to be any kind of treatment which will make alcoholics of our kind like other men. We have tried every imaginable remedy. In some instances, there has been brief recovery, followed always by a still worse relapse. That is a promise. I always thought to myself, well, there's no way it could get as worse as it was that last time. And then I drink again, and it was worse. I may not have ended up in jail or a place similar or wrecked my car, but my mentality was worse. It was taking a lot longer for me to recover, from just a few days of drinking. And that consistently gets worse too. Physicians who are familiar with alcoholism agree, highlight this, there is no such thing as making a normal drinker out of an alcoholic. Science may one day accomplish this, but it hasn't done so yet. That was written in 1939. Has science accomplished a cure for alcoholism or addiction? They haven't. And even Dr. Silkworth himself, who specialized in alcoholism, had no answer. The answer came from altruism and from God, most importantly. I have this next paragraph completely highlighted and bracketed. Despite all we can say, many who are real alcoholics aren't going to believe they are in that class. By every form of self-deception and experimentation, they will try to prove themselves exceptions to the rule, therefore non-alcoholic. If anyone who is showing inability to control his drinking can do with the right about face and drink like a gentleman, our hats are off to him. Heaven knows we have tried hard enough and long enough to drink like other people. This next paragraph, call it methods. I have this page labeled method. So if you're trying to help another alcoholic that isn't quite sure if they're an alcoholic, show them this paragraph. These are some of the methods that alcoholics do. So see if they can relate with any of these methods. When I read them for the first time, there was no doubt. I did every single one of these methods that they're going to talk about. Let's read them. Here are some of the methods we have tried. Drinking beer only, limiting the number of drinks, never drinking alone, never drinking in the morning, drinking only at home, never having it in the house, never drinking during business hours, drinking only at parties, switching from scotch to brandy, drinking only natural wines, agreeing to resign if ever drunk on the job, taking a trip, not taking a trip, swearing off forever with and without a solemn oath, taking more physical exercise, reading inspirational books, going to health farms and sanitariums, accepting voluntary commitment to asylums. We could increase the list ad infinitum forever. There's more. But if you have more than a few of those, you might be alcoholic. But show those, show this paragraph to someone who's not sure. Let them decide for themselves, because we can't diagnose anyone as an alcoholic. Oops, I jumped the gun. Next sentence. We do not like to pronounce any individual as an alcoholic, but you can quickly diagnose yourself. And I have this labeled the first test. Step over to the nearest bar room and try some controlled drinking. Try to drink and stop abruptly. Try it more than once. It will not take long for you to decide if you are honest with yourself about it. It may be worth a bad case of jitters if you get a full knowledge of your condition. You have to know that you can't have one drink. And that's the test that they are telling us over and over again. One drink, one drug will set off that phenomenon of craving, and off to the races I go. For me, my experience with it was like a switch. My delusion, I would start gathering up all these excuses on how it's going to be different this time, how I'm only going to have a couple today. It was never really one, but even when I said one, I would say, let me do the one or two or, a very small amount of drinking, and then I'm going to control it after that. And as soon as I drank that one, that switch went off. And every promise that was pre-made on how it was going to be different this time was gone. And my only focus was that next drink. The obsession takes over every time I put alcohol or drugs in my system. And only you can know that. You have to know that. Will it take a lot of experimentation if you're in and out of the program and don't really want to stop? It will. There's old timers that would tell new guys, if they weren't sure if they're a real alcoholic, well, go ahead and do the first test, step over to the nearest bar room and try some controlled drinking. Is it wrong for a real alcoholic to tell that to a newcomer if they're not sure and they don't really want to waste their time in AA? Not at all. It says it may be worth a bad case of jitters if you get a full knowledge of your condition. You have to know what that phenomenon of craving is, and more importantly, you have to know that you are the real alcoholic that has that phenomenon of craving. Only a real alcoholic has that allergy, as we discussed. Though there is no way of proving it, we believe that early in our drinking careers, most of us could have stopped drinking, but the difficulty is that few alcoholics have enough desire to stop while there is still yet time. We have heard of few instances where people who show definite signs of alcoholism were able to stop for a long period of time because of his overpowering desire to do so. Here's one. So now we're going to get into different examples of real alcoholics. Here's one that's going to take a lot of time off, thinking that time is going to beat him being an alcoholic. Let's see what happens. A man of 30 was doing a great deal of spree drinking. He was very nervous in the morning after these bouts and quieted himself with more liquor. He was ambitious to succeed in business, but saw that he could get nowhere if he drank at all. Once he started, he had no control whatever. There's a sign, phenomenon of craving. He made up his mind that until he had been successful in business and had retired, he would not touch another drop. An exceptional man, he remained bone dry for 25 years and retired at the age of 55 after a successful and happy business career. Some of us can do that. It doesn't describe how his life was for that 25 years. When we get into the chapter on resentment, it was probably pretty miserable. If you've ever met a real alcoholic that is just white knuckling it, not drinking, they're pretty miserable. But we can take, once we make a commitment to do something as alcoholics, we can do it. And this man made a commitment to not drink for 25 years. He did it. Let's see what happens. He fell victim to a belief, which practically every alcoholic has, that his long period of sobriety and self-discipline had qualified him to drink as other men. Belief. What is the definition of delusion? Persistent, false, psychotic belief. So he fell victim to that belief, the delusion. Out came his carpet slippers in a bottle. In 2 months, he was in a hospital, puzzled and humiliated. He tried to regulate his drinking for a while, making several trips to the hospital meantime. Then, gathering all his forces, he attempted to stop altogether and found he could not. Every means of solving his problem which money could buy was at his disposal. I have this highlighted. Every attempt failed. He had the money to stop drinking, couldn't do it. Though a robust man at retirement, he went to pieces quickly and was dead within 4 years. So, real alcoholic, bad shape, was going to insane asylums and, probably DTs. Stopped drinking for 25 years, went through 25 years without alcohol. Then he started drinking again and he was dead within 4 years. Once he started to drink, he was in his bathrobe, carpet slippers, and started getting back into asylums. That was the only place to take a drunk during that time. So the lesson is, It doesn't matter how much time you have between your last drink and your next drink. A week, month, years, 25 years. When you take that drink, you will go right back into the place you were from your last drink, but worse. But worse. Every single time. This case contains a powerful lesson. Most of us have believed that if we remain sober for a long stretch, we could therefore drink normally. But here's a man who at 55 years was found just where he had left off when he was 30. We have seen the truth demonstrated again and again, and I would highlight the rest of this paragraph. Once an alcoholic, always an alcoholic. Commencing to drink after a period of sobriety, we are in a short time as bad as ever. If we are planning to stop drinking, there must be, I told you to highlight it, but circle this too, no reservation of any kind, nor any lurking notion that someday we will be immune to alcohol. Lurking notion, it's a vague thought. You know, I almost died, it almost killed me, but maybe somehow, some way in the future, I might be able to drink normally. That's that lurking notion. You can't have a reservation of any kind. You have to know that you can't have a drop, you can't have a drug. Young people may be encouraged by this man's experience to think they can stop as he did on their own willpower. That because of my age, I was in the rooms in my 20s, because I thought I had time, being so young that my liver was going to be fine until at least I was in my 50s, that thinking almost got me killed. Especially today with the amount of fentanyl and very tiny drugs that can be mixed with booze, people in their 20s and in their teens are dying every day. Don't let your age prevent you from finding the solution. It doesn't matter. Age has no bearing on alcoholism and how it affects you. And then it says, we doubt if many of them can do it because none of them really want to stop, and hardly one of them because of that peculiar, abnormal, mental twist. Another words describing insanity. They use those words, mental twists, a couple times. Already acquired, will find he can win out. Several of our crowdmen of 30 or less had been drinking only a few years, and they found themselves as helpless as those who had been drinking 20 years. To be gravely affected, highlight this, one does not necessarily have to drink a long time nor take the quantities some of us have. It's not about quantity. It's how it is affecting your life during that time when you're drinking. This is particularly true of women. Potential female alcoholics often turn into the real thing, and are often gone beyond recall in a few years. Certain drinkers who would be greatly insulted if called alcoholics are astonished at their inability to stop. More words describing phenomenon of craving. We who are familiar with the symptoms see large numbers of potential alcoholics among young people everywhere, but try to get them to see it. I have this whole next paragraph bracketed on 34. As we look back, we feel we had gone on drinking many years beyond the point where we could quit on our willpower. If anyone questions whether he has entered this dangerous area, I have this labeled the second test. First test, step over to the bar room and try controlled drinking. Here's the second test. Let him try leaving liquor alone for 1 year. Okay, say you pass that test. It should be no problem if you had a beer and went through the day and you think you're good. Try doing that for a year if it's not a problem. If he's a real alcoholic and very far advanced, there is scant chance of success, and scant is scarce. In the early days of drinking, we occasionally remained sober for a year or more. I never got a year. Some people do. Becoming serious drinkers again later. Though you may be able to stop for a considerable period, you may yet be a potential alcoholic. We think few to whom this book will appeal can stay dry anything like a year. Some will be drunk the day after making their resolutions, most of them within a few weeks. For those who are unable to drink moderately, the question is how to stop altogether. Highlight this next sentence. This is for anyone that asks you for help to stop drinking. We are assuming, of course, that the reader desires to stop. That's the very first question you should ask anyone who comes to you for help. Do you want to stop? if they're just thinking about it, if they bring up a sheet that they're court ordered and just need a signature, the book is going to tell us we don't waste time. And I'm not going to, we don't waste time with people that are not willing, because it's going to waste our time. We want to help people that want to stop drinking. If they don't want to stop drinking, it's very hard to help that person, if not impossible. So that's a direction. The reader of this book, they are assuming wants to stop drinking. Whether such a person can quit upon a non-spiritual basis depends upon the extent to which he has already lost the power to choose whether he will drink or not. Many of us felt that we had plenty of character. I wrote ego right above that. There was a tremendous urge to seize forever, yet we found it impossible. I have the rest of this highlighted. This is the baffling feature of alcoholism as we know it, the utter inability to leave it alone, no matter how great the necessity or the wish. Again, that's describing the phenomenon of craving. I put the alcohol or drugs in my system. I'm not stopping. How then shall we help our readers determine to their own satisfaction whether they are one of us? The experiment of quitting for a period of time will be helpful, but we think we can render an even greater service to alcoholic sufferers and perhaps to the medical fraternity. I know my page is backwards when you see it on here, but in big letters on this page, I have relapse. Relapse on this page 35. So we shall describe some of the mental states that precede a relapse into drinking. So it's going to describe our mind before we pick up that first drink. For obviously, this is the crux of the problem. Crux is crucial point. This is the most important part of my problem. Not the drinking, my mental state before I pick up the drink. Bracket this next paragraph and highlight it. What sort of thinking dominates an alcoholic who repeats time after time the desperate experiment of the first drink? Question mark. They're going to go into some details here, and then they're going to answer the question. I'll tell you where they answer that question so we can bring it back to this page. Friends who have reasoned with him after a spree which has brought him to the point of divorce or bankruptcy are mystified when he walks directly into a saloon. Why does he? Of what is he thinking? Our first example is a friend we shall call Jim. This man has a charming wife, family. He inherited a lucrative automobile agency. He has a commendable World War record. He's a good salesman. Everybody likes him. He's an intelligent man, normal so far as we can see, except a nervous disposition. He did no drinking until he was 35. In a few years, he became so violent when intoxicated, he had to be committed. On leaving the asylum, he came into contact with us. We told him what we knew of alcoholism. So he's in contact with Bill and Bob. Bill and Bob are sharing with him, Jim, what they know of alcoholism. So they're sharing with him Dr. Silkworth's description of alcoholism. And the answer they had found, so they gave him the solution too. He made a beginning. His family was reassembled and he began to work as a salesman for the business he had lost through drinking. All went well for a time. Highlight this. He failed to enlarge his spiritual life. So I think I told you this when we were on this page, that as we go through the book, a lot like the Bible, this book would not have been made without the Bible. We're going to read something and we're going to go back to it. It's called an affirmation. He failed to enlarge our spiritual life is an affirmation on page 14. So write page 14 next to that. Go to page 14, and it tells us exactly what happens when we fail to enlarge our spiritual life when we are in recovery, not drinking. Things could be going great, but this is what happens when I do not enlarge my spiritual life, when I don't seek that relationship with Jesus. Bottom of page 14. Faith without works was dead. Again, that comes from the book of James. How appallingly true for the alcoholic, for if the alcoholic failed to perfect and enlarge his spiritual life through work and self-sacrifice for others, he could not survive the certain trials and low spots ahead. Just because I'm not drinking, does that mean I'm not going to face trials and low spots? Absolutely not. I'm going to face those. The big book tells me how to face them sober, but if I don't know how to face them sober, if I'm not enlarging my spiritual life with God, I'm in trouble. And this is what happens. If I did not work, I would surely drink again. And if I drank, I would surely die. Then faith would be dead indeed. And again, with us, it is just like that. The authors are not trying to scare us there. That's what happens to the alcoholic. I know guys 30, 40 years sober that sit in the rooms miserable and grumpy because they don't enlarge their spiritual life. They found a concept of God, which that can get you sober. Not going to get you saved, but that can get you sober. And they stay in the rooms, and because they don't seek who God is, the one true God, they don't seek him, they don't enlarge their spiritual life, they either drink again or they're miserable. And that's a fact. So that is an affirmation. Jim failed to enlarge his spiritual life. Let's see what happens. To his consternation, which is dismay or fear, he found himself drunk half a dozen times in rapid succession. On each of these occasions, we worked with him, reviewing carefully what happened. He agreed he was a real alcoholic. So again, just knowing you're a real alcoholic, as in Bill Wilson's story, it's not going to keep you sober. He knows he's a real alcoholic and in serious condition. He knew he faced another trip to the asylum if he kept on. Moreover, he would lose his family for whom he had a deep affection. Does knowing that keep us sober? Next sentence, yet he got drunk again. We asked him to tell us exactly how it happened. This is his story. Now, as we're reading this story, it's gonna say certain things that Jim is going through before he picks up that drink. Let's examine what those things he's going through are. I came to work on Tuesday morning. I remember I felt irritated. I would highlight irritated. That I had to be a salesman for a concern I once owned. Irritated, resentful, little angry. That's where his mindset is. I had a few words with my boss. That anger came out in action. He's now having a few words with his boss. The anger is not only mental and inside, it's coming out in his actions. But nothing serious, he thought. Then I decided to drive into the country and see one of my prospects for a car. On the way, I felt hungry. There's a term in recovery that you'll hear from a lot of people. It's called HALT, H-A-L-T. Hungry, angry, lonely, tired. If you're feeling those things, especially all four of them, you better get to a meeting. You better pick up that phone. You better start praying to God. You don't want to sit in that state of being of halt. Jim is in that state of being. And he stopped at a roadside place where they have a bar. I have this highlighted. I had no intention of drinking. I just thought I would get a sandwich. I also had a idea, that I might find a customer for a car at this place, which was familiar, for I had been going to it for years. I had eaten there many times during the months I was sober. I sat down at a table and ordered a sandwich and a glass of milk. Still no thought of drinking. I ordered a sandwich and decided to have another glass of milk. Next paragraph, all italicized words. It must be very important. I have it bracketed. I have it labeled insanity. Suddenly, the thought crossed my mind that if I were to put an ounce of whiskey in my milk, it couldn't hurt me on a full stomach. Suddenly, that thought, remember, he had no intention of drinking. And then, boom, the thought is there, and he has no defense against that thought because he's hungry, he's angry, he's lonely, he's tired. I ordered a whiskey and poured it into the milk. I vaguely sensed I was not being any too smart, but felt reassured as I was taking the whiskey on a full stomach. Remember where he knew he had just been with Bill and Bob, he was locked up in asylums, every time he drank before that all of a sudden is out the window. His focus is, I'm reassured because I had something to eat. An ounce of whiskey isn't going to hurt me. Delusion. The experiment went so well that I ordered another whiskey and poured it into the milk and more milk. That didn't seem to bother me, so I tried another. 1 ounce of whiskey went into his system. Phenomenon of craving. The allergy is set off. He has to have more whiskey. Have to understand that. The phenomenon of craving is an allergy, the physical part to this disease. The normal drinker, the heavy drinker, will never understand that. Thus started one more journey to the asylum for Jim. Here was the threat of commitment, the loss of family and position, to say nothing of that intense mental and physical suffering which drinking always caused him. Here's italicized words. He had much knowledge about himself as an alcoholic. He knew he was an alcoholic. Yet all reasons for not drinking were easily pushed aside in favor of the foolish idea that he could take whiskey if only he mixed it with milk. Whatever the precise definition of the word may be, we call this plain insanity, exhibiting a serious, debilitating mental disorder. How can such a lack of proportion of the ability to think straight be called anything else? You may think this is an extreme case. To us, it is not far-fetched. And I just highlight the rest of the paragraph. This kind of thinking has been characteristic of every single one of us. Remember, these are the first 100 alcoholics that wrote this book. And that thinking that Jim just had, every alcoholic said they had it. We have sometimes reflected more than Jim did upon the consequences. But there always was the curious mental phenomenon that parallel with our sound reasoning, there inevitably ran some insanely trivial excuse for taking the first drink. Our sound reasoning failed to hold us in check. The insane idea won out. Next, we would ask ourselves in all earnestness and sincerity, how could it have happened? And I think of those two parallel lines in my brain. One knows I absolutely cannot have a drink and I need to seek God and I need to be a good person. The other line that's running parallel with it is insanity. It's delusion. And if I don't do anything about it, that is going to win out every single time. Next paragraph, I have it bracketed. I have it labeled deliberate relapse and I have it labeled emotional drinking. Actually, let me back up. Remember that question I told you on page 35? Back to 35. It says, what sort of thinking dominates an alcoholic who repeats time after time the desperate experiment of the first drink? The answer to the question we just read on page 37. Whatever the precise definition of the word may be, we call this plain insanity, exhibiting a serious, debilitating mental disorder. So there's the answer to the question on 35. Back to, in some circumstances, I have it labeled deliberate relapse, and I also have it labeled emotional drinking. In some circumstances, we have gone out deliberately to get drunk, feeling ourselves justified. Look at these words they're using. Nervousness, anger, worry, depression, jealousy, or the like. I've drank over all of those, and I'm sure you have too. But even in this type of beginning, we are obliged to admit that our justification for a spree was insanely insufficient in the light of what always happened. I circled always. We now see that when we begin to drink deliberately instead of casually, there was little serious or effective thought during the period of premeditation of what the terrific consequences may be. Our behavior is absurd and incomprehensible with respect to the first drink, as that of an individual with a passion save for jaywalking. Okay, now they're going to use, like Jesus liked to use parables. The authors are going to use a parable here. We're going to go through a story about the jaywalker, but I want you to concentrate on what he is thinking every time he continues to jaywalk. He gets a thrill out of skipping in front of fast-moving vehicles. He enjoys himself for a few years in spite of friendly warnings. Up to this point, you would label him a foolish chap, having queer ideas of fun. Luck then deserts him, and he's finally injured several times in succession, slightly injured several times in succession. You would expect him, if you were normal, to cut it out. Presently, he is hit again, and this time has a fractured skull. Do you see how things are getting worse every time he goes back and jaywalks? Within a week after leaving the hospital, a fast-moving trolley car breaks his arm. He tells you he has decided to stop jaywalking for good, but in a few weeks he breaks both legs. On through the years, this conduct continues, accompanied by his continual promise to be careful or to keep off the streets altogether. Finally, he can no longer work, his wife gets a divorce, and he is held up to ridicule. He tries every known means to get the jaywalking idea out of his head. He shuts himself up in the asylum, hoping to mend his ways. But the day he comes out, he races in front of a fire engine, which breaks his back. Such a man would be crazy, wouldn't he? You may think our illustration is too ridiculous, but is it? We who have been through the ringer, I have this highlighted, have to admit that if we substituted alcoholism for jaywalking, the illustration would fit us exactly. However intelligent we may have been in other respects, highlight this, where alcohol has been involved, we have been strangely insane. It's strong language, but isn't it true? Again, once I finally fully understood what obsession was, what delusion was, what psychosis was, and most importantly, what insanity was, it opened my eyes. I was still in suffering. I still had the obsession to drink, but there was a light of hope because I knew what mind I was up against, and that mind was not in reality. I could not differentiate the true from the false. That's why I kept drinking. When you know the mind you're up against, you have a shot. And you just take that shot and continue moving forward in these 12 steps. Some of you are thinking, yes, what you tell us is true, but it doesn't fully apply. Our mind, the enemy is always going to give us doubt, confusion. We know who the author of confusion is. It's not God. We admit we have some of these symptoms, but we have not gone to the extremes you fellows did, nor are we likely to, for we understand ourselves so well after what you have told us that such things cannot happen again. We have not lost everything in life through drinking, and we certainly do not intend to. Thanks for the information. In big letters on top of this page, I have self-knowledge. So we're going to get into another story. But this whole paragraph describes self-knowledge, and I don't think there's another page in this book that describes self-knowledge. In other words, I know I'm an alcoholic. I know how bad it's going to get. I know what one drink does to me. I know there's a solution. I know there's God. Is all that self-knowledge going to keep me sober? No. Let's read the paragraph. That may be true of certain non-alcoholic people who, though drinking foolishly and heavily at the present time, are able to stop or moderate because their brains and bodies have not been damaged as ours were, the heavy drinker, the moderate drinker. But the actual or potential alcoholic, the real alcoholic, with hardly an exception, italicized words, will be absolutely unable to stop drinking on the basis of self-knowledge. This is a point we wish to emphasize and re-emphasize, to smash home upon our alcoholic readers as it has been revealed to us out of our bitter experience, not their opinion, their experience. Just because I know I'm a real alcoholic and I know there's a solution, that's not enough to keep me sober. Here's another illustration. Now we're going to read about Fred. We read about Jim. Remember his mindset before he took a drink. Okay, things were kind of bad. He had words with his boss. He was going through anger. Fred's going to be the opposite of that. We don't have to be in a bad state of mind to drink. Things can be going great, and we can still drink. That's how powerful the delusion can be, or the self-knowledge, as it was just described. So let's read about Fred. He's a partner in a well-known accounting firm. His income is good. He has a fine home, happily married, and the father of promising children of college age. He is so attractive a personality that he makes friends with everyone. If ever there was a successful businessman, it's Fred. To all appearance, he is stable, well-balanced individual. I have this highlighted. Yet he is alcoholic. We first saw Fred about a year ago in a hospital where he had gone to recover from a bad case of jitters. It was his first experience of this kind, and he was much ashamed of it. Far from admitting he was an alcoholic, so he's not even close to admitting he's an alcoholic, he told himself he could come to the hospital to rest his nerves. The doctor intimated means to indicate or make known indirectly, strongly that he might be worse than he realized. We never listen to doctors, do we? For a few days, he was depressed about his condition. He made up his mind to quit drinking altogether. It never occurred to him that perhaps he could not do so, in spite of his character and standing. Fred could not believe himself an alcoholic, much less accept a spiritual remedy for his problem. Remedy, what's the solution to our problem? Spiritual, God. We told him what we knew about alcoholism, so Fred is meeting with Bill and Bob. Bill and Bob is giving them what they know about alcoholism. He was interested and conceded that he had some of the symptoms, but was a long way from admitting he could do nothing about it himself. He was positive that this humiliating experience plus the knowledge he had acquired would keep him sober the rest of his life. Self-knowledge would fix it. Let's see. We heard no more of Fred for a while. One day we were told that he was back in the hospital. This time he was quite shaky. He soon indicated he was anxious to see us. The story he told us is most instructive, for here was a chap absolutely convinced he had to stop drinking, who had no excuse for drinking, who exhibited splendid judgment and determination in all his other concerns, yet was flat on his back nevertheless. Let him tell you about it. I was much impressed with what you fellows said about alcoholism, and I frankly did not believe it would be possible for me to drink again. I have this highlighted. I rather appreciated your ideas about the subtle insanity which precedes the first drink, but I was confident it could not happen to me after what I had learned. I reasoned I was not so far advanced as most of you fellows, that I had been usually successful in licking my other personal problems, and that I would therefore be successful where you men failed. A lot of people that come to the rooms think that. I was one of them many times. I felt that I had every right to be self-confident, that it would only be a matter of exercising my willpower and keeping on guard. In this frame of mind, I went about my business, and for a time all was well. So now let's look at Fred's mindset. It's going to be the opposite of Jim's. I had no trouble refusing drinks and began to wonder if I had not been making too hard a work of a simple matter. One day I went to Washington to present some accounting evidence, so he's traveling, to a government bureau. I had been out of town before during this particular dry spell, so there was nothing new about that. Physically, I felt fine. Physically, he's feeling great. Neither did I have any pressing problems or worries. Not worrying, not anxious, no problems. So opposite of Jim. My business came off well. He's making money. His business is going well. I was pleased and knew my partners would be too. He's making other people happy. It was the end of a perfect day. Highlight this. Not a cloud on the horizon. You'll hear in the rooms what a pink cloud is. This is where they get it from. A lot of people, I didn't know that. It's in the big book. A lot of people, for a lot of us, when we stop drinking, you'll hear it called a pink cloud. You stop drinking, and after a while, all of a sudden, you start feeling good. Physically good, mentally, you get a job, you get your wife coming back, you get your family back. Things are going great. Physically, you're feeling better. Mentally, you're feeling better. That's called the pink cloud. People think that pink cloud, which is just another term for self-knowledge, and I feel good, is going to keep me sober. Let's see what happened to Fred. I went to my hotel and leisurely dressed for dinner. Okay, so he's feeling great. He got dressed. He's walking around the hotel. Italicized words. As I crossed the threshold of the dining room, the thought came to mind that it would be nice to have a couple of cocktails with dinner. That was all, nothing more. Jim had the thought when he sat down. He was feeling angry, but the thought of whiskey and milk. Fred's here walking around the hotel. He's feeling great. The thought would come that he could just have a couple cocktails with dinner. Notice it's couple, not one. That was all, nothing more. That's how, if you're not in recovery, if you're not enlarging your spiritual life, just because you know you're an alcoholic, the delusion is still running the show. And that thought to drink can come at any time, whether you're feeling good or feeling bad or anything in between. And when that thought comes, you have no defense against it, and you will pick up that drink. I ordered a cocktail and my meal. Then I ordered another cocktail. Phenomenon of craving. He ordered one, boom, allergy. He ordered another one. After dinner, I decided to take a walk. When I returned to the hotel, it struck me a highball would be fine before going to bed. So I stepped into the bar and had one. I remember having several more that night and plenty the next morning. I have a shadowy recollection of being in an airplane bound for New York and of finding a friendly taxi cab driver at the landing instead of my wife. The driver escorted me about for several days. I know little of where I went or what I said and did. Then came the hospital with unbearable mental and physical suffering. I don't know about you. I had many blackouts. That's describing a blackout. So I just wrote blackout right next to that paragraph. As soon as I regained my ability to think, and boy, that can get worse and worse. When you stop drinking, I remember I couldn't add 1 + 1 in my head and I was 3 days sober. I went carefully over that evening in Washington, all italicized words, so all this should be highlighted. Not only had I been off guard, I had made no fight whatever against the first drink. This time I had not thought of the consequences at all. Pink cloud. I had commenced to drink as carelessly as though the cocktails were ginger ale. I had now remembered what my alcoholic friends had told me, how they prophesied that if I had an alcoholic mind, the time and place would come. I would drink again. Bill and Bob told him. They sat down with him. They told him, they gave him his condition. They gave him, what we read about in Bill's story, the amount of self-knowledge that he had. He knew absolutely he could not have one drink. And what happened? Self-knowledge did not keep him sober. So they had said that though I did raise a defense, it would only give way for some trivial reason for having a drink. Well, just that did happen and more. And what I had learned of alcoholism did not occur to me at all. I knew from that moment that I had an alcoholic mind. I have this highlighted. I saw that willpower and self-knowledge would not help in those strange mental blank spots. We all get those strange mental blank spots. If you're in recovery, you know what to do with them. If you're not in recovery, those thoughts will take over to your actions. I had never been able to understand people who had said the problem had them hopelessly defeated. I knew then it was a crushing blow. 2 of the members of Alcoholics Anonymous came to see me. They grinned, which I didn't like so much, and then asked me if I thought myself an alcoholic and if I were really licked this time. It's funny because we still get that today. 2 members came in and grinned, and Fred didn't like that, but when people go out and they come back in, you'll get some comments from old timers, or maybe not even old timers, but how'd that work out for you? You hear that a lot in AA. So you went back out, came back in. How'd that work out for you? So Fred's not happy when they said something like that. They're asking if he thought he was a real alcoholic, and Fred says, I have to concede to both propositions. They piled on me heaps of evidence to the effect that an alcoholic mentality such as I exhibited in Washington, I have this highlighted, was a hopeless condition. They cited cases out of their own experience by the dozen. This process snuffed out the last flicker of conviction that I could do the job myself. I have this highlighted. They outlined the spiritual answer, God, and program of action, the 12 steps, which 100 of them had followed successfully, the writers of this book. Though I had only been a nominal churchman, their proposals were not intellectually hard to swallow, but the program of action, though entirely sensible, was pretty drastic. Have all this highlighted. It meant I would have to throw several lifelong conceptions out of the window. Remember what the definition of conception is. Idea. Yes, we have a conception of a higher power that the book describes, but it's just an idea of a higher power. It's not necessarily true. Seeking God is much more important than having a concept or an idea that comes from my sick mind. But the moment I made up my mind to go through with the process, I had a curious feeling that my alcoholic condition was relieved, as in fact it proved to be. I have written right next to this the point of surrender, and I remember this, for myself. I was still suffering, but now I understood what alcoholism truly was, but I made a commitment, a point of surrender, that I would go through this process and put it in God's hands. I was stepping completely out of the way. Didn't matter if I had hope or faith that this would work. I was just going to do it. I was just going to go through the 164 pages and put it in God's hands. I surrender. Because I couldn't do anything on my own. I could not stop drinking, and I had tried every possible means there was. So right point of surrender, right next to this. Quite as important was the discovery, have this highlighted, that spiritual principles would solve, doesn't say some, doesn't say most, all my problems. That should give you hope. And it's very true. I have since been brought into a way of living infinitely more satisfying and I hope more useful than the life I lived before. My old manner of life was by no means a bad one, but I would not exchange its best moments for the worst I have now. I would not go back to it even if I could. Fred's story speaks for itself. We hope it strikes home to thousands like him. He had felt only the first nip of the ringer. I have the rest of this highlighted. Most alcoholics have to be pretty badly mangled before they really commence to solve their problems. That's true. Most of us, a lot of people can sober up very young and get it right away. I wasn't one of them. I was one of those people that was in and out, in and out. A lot of people are. And the definition of mangled: repeated blows over and over. Every time I submitted to that delusion, here's the way I'm going to do it differently this time, I kept getting a thump on my head from that hammer. Repeated blows over and over. But the good news is I learned from every single blow that happened to me. Those repeated blows turned into an asset that can help another alcoholic. The rest of this page I have completely highlighted. Many doctors and psychiatrists agree with our conclusions. One of these men, staff member of a world-renowned hospital, recently made this statement to some of us. And this is Dr. Percy Pollock of Bellevue Hospital. What you say about the general hopelessness of the average alcoholic's plight is, in my opinion, correct. As to two of you men whose stories I have heard, there's no doubt in my mind that you are 100% hopeless, apart from divine help, God. Had you offered yourself as patients at this hospital, I would not have taken you. So this is a doctor, another one that specializes in alcoholism and drug addiction, and he said he can't do anything. He said you're hopeless apart from divine help. People like you are too heartbreaking. Though not a religious person, so he's saying, basically, he's either an agnostic or an atheist. I have a profound respect for the spiritual approach in such cases as yours. For most cases, there is virtually no other solution. Here's a doctor who doesn't believe in God that is telling the alcoholic, you need God. The only way you're going to sober up is divine help. Pretty powerful. Once more, the alcoholic at certain times has no effective mental defense against the first drink. Story of Jim, story of Fred, Jaywalker, hopefully that describes that. Doesn't matter how I feel, good or bad. I have no defense against that first drink without God, without recovery. Except in a few rare cases, neither he or any other human being can provide such a defense. I have this highlighted. His defense must come from a higher power, God. Again, at this point, if you're an atheist or agnostic, your mindset needs to get to the point of willing to believe. And if you were hurt by Christians when you were raised, if you were hurt by religion, if you are just mad at God, so you decided in your mind that he doesn't exist, which you can't do, but we can do that as alcoholics. You have to, at this point, know what alcoholism is. You can't defeat it on your own, and you have to be willing to believe in God. That it's telling us our defense must come from nothing here, a higher power. Doorbell. Hopefully that helps you out. Those are my dogs barking, but again, this is episode 6, and so just make sure you do them in order. God bless.